He was a killer who signed his crimes with a symbol, a circle with a cross through it. He taunted police with letters. He sent puzzles that promised to reveal his name. He threatened school buses full of children. And then, he vanished. The Zodiac Killer wasn't just a murderer. He was a phantom who turned fear into his weapon, and a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. This is the chilling story of America's most cryptic serial killer. The late 1960s. California was in the middle of a cultural revolution. San Francisco streets buzzed with music, protests, and the summer of love. But beneath the peace signs and psychedelic colors, a darker reality lurked. The nation was already shaken by violence. The Manson family murders, political assassinations, and a growing sense that nowhere was safe. And in Northern California, a predator was about to emerge. A predator who would not only kill, but who would play with the world like it was his own private game. On December 20th, 1968, two teenagers parked on Lake Herman Road, a quiet lover's lane. Their names were David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. What happened next is still debated. But what is known as this: someone approached their car. At least 10 shots were fired. Betty Lou tried to run. She collapsed in the darkness, 5 bullets in her back. David was found beside the car, a bullet through his skull. There was no robbery, no sexual assault, just cold, deliberate murder. At first, police thought it might be a random act of violence. But the killer wasn't finished. He was just beginning. Over the next months, the killer would strike again. He would send letters. He would give himself a name that would make headlines across America. And what made him unlike any other killer was this: he didn't just murder in shadows. He wanted attention. He wanted the world to watch. And so, he began to write. In August 1969, the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Examiner, and the San Francisco Chronicle each received a letter. The author claimed responsibility for the shootings. He described the murders with details only the killer could know. And each letter contained a third of a strange, coded message. He demanded they be printed on the front page of the newspapers. Or, he warned he would kill again. This was the first time the world saw his twisted game. The ciphers seemed impossible. A jumble of symbols, circles, triangles, and letters. But within days, a local schoolteacher and his wife cracked it. The message was chilling. It began, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." The killer described murder as his greatest thrill. He compared it to hunting wild game. And then he ended with a taunt. His identity was hidden in the code. But the solution didn't contain his name. It was another cruel trick. By now, the world had a name for him: Zodiac. He had already killed, and he promised more blood to come. The newspapers became his stage. The police became his unwilling audience. And the public, they became his hostages. He threatened to shoot children as they rode the school bus. He bragged about killing dozens more victims the police had never found. And each time, his letters dripped with arrogance and contempt. The Zodiac Killer wasn't just spilling blood. He was feeding on fear. What began as a double murder on a lonely road had become something far more sinister. A faceless killer had declared war on California and on sanity itself. Over the next years, his crimes would escalate. His letters would taunt. His identity would remain a riddle wrapped in symbols. And the shadow of the Zodiac would stretch over America for decades to come. It was the Friday before Christmas, 1968. On the quiet outskirts of Vallejo, a lonely road cut through the dark fields, Lake Herman Road. That night, 2 teenagers went there seeking privacy. David Faraday, just 17, was a straight-laced Boy Scout, well-liked, polite. His date, 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen, was outgoing, friendly, with dreams of becoming a teacher. They parked David's Rambler station wagon near the entrance of a local pumping station. The winter air was cold. The night was silent. The perfect setting for young love, and the perfect hunting ground for a predator. At about 11 p.m., another vehicle pulled up beside them. Exactly what happened next, no one can say. But what is certain is that the piece of Lake Herman Road was shattered by gunfire. David was shot in the head at point-blank range, collapsing near the car. Betty Lou ran, sprinting across the road in terror. She never made it far. Bullets tore in her back, 5 in total, leaving her body lying face down in the cold dirt, just 28 feet from the car. 10 casings were found. A .22 caliber weapon. No fingerprints. No weaknesses. In one violent outburst, the Zodiac Killer had claimed his first known victims. The double murder stunned the small communities of Benicia and Vallejo. But with no motive, no suspects, and no clues beyond the bullets, investigators struggled. There was no robbery, no sexual assault, no personal connection that detectives could trace. Just 2 innocent teenagers slaughtered without reason. Some wondered if it was the work of a jealous rival or a random thrill killer. But within months, the truth would become terrifyingly clear. Lake Herman Road was only the beginning. It was the 4th of July, 1969. The nation was celebrating its independence. In Vallejo, another teenage couple parked at Blue Rock Springs, a secluded lover's lane not far from Lake Herman Road. 22-year-old Darlene Farron, a lively, married woman with a magnetic personality, had gone out with 19-year-old Michael Mageau, a shy, quiet friend. Around midnight, the two sat in Darlene's car, enjoying the night. That's when another vehicle pulled in behind them. Its headlights bathed their car in white. Then it drove away. Moments later, it returned. The driver stepped out, a heavy-set man with glasses. He approached their car. At first, Michael thought it might be a police officer. The man shined a bright flashlight directly into their eyes, blinding them. Without warning, the gunfire erupted. Bullets ripped into the car. Michael was shot in the jaw and neck. Darlene was struck multiple times. As the victim screamed, the man turned to walk away. But then he came back, and he fired again, methodically, as if determined to finish the job. 9 shots in total. Then, the gunman disappeared into the night. Barely 40 minutes later, a call came into the Vallejo Police Department. The voice was calm. Male. Monotone. I want to report a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye. The killer had just confessed to 2 separate crimes. Police rushed to Blue Rock Springs. Darlene Farron was still alive, but barely. She was rushed to the hospital, where she died soon after. Against all odds, Michael Mageau survived, despite horrific injuries. He later told police that the shooter had been a white male, about 5 feet 8 inches, heavy build, short brown hair, with glasses. It was the first eyewitness account of the Zodiac Killer. The community was shaken. 2 double shootings in less than a year, both in secluded areas, both against young couples. And now, for the first time, the killer wasn't just leaving bodies. He was making phone calls, announcing his crimes, demanding attention. Fear spread through Vallejo. Teenagers no longer felt safe parking on lovers' lanes. Parents worried every time their children left home at night. A faceless figure had declared himself judge, jury, and executioner, and his chilling words over the phone made one thing clear. He wasn't finished. Weeks later, 3 newspapers, the San Francisco Examiner, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Vallejo Times-Herald, each received a letter. The author claimed responsibility for the Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs murders. He described the crimes in detail, including facts only the killer could know. Each envelope contained a third of a strange coded message, a cipher made of symbols and letters. The killer demanded all 3 newspapers publish his cryptogram on the front page. If they didn't, he warned, he would cruise around all weekend killing lone people in the night, then move on to kill again until I end up with a dozen people over the weekend. The signature at the bottom was chilling, a circle with a cross through it. The killer had given himself a name. He was now Zodiac. From December 1968 to July 1969, the Zodiac Killer had murdered 3 people, critically wounded another, and terrified an entire community. But the killings themselves were only half the story. This killer craved something more than blood. He wanted attention. He wanted control. With his letters, his phone calls, and his cryptic codes, the Zodiac had elevated himself from shadow in the dark to a name every Californian knew. And soon, his reign of terror would escalate into something far more sinister. The stage was set for one of the most infamous cat-and-mouse games in American history. It was the summer of 1969. Just weeks after the Blue Rock Springs shooting, the killer reached out again. But this time, he didn't use a gun. He used words. 3 nearly identical letters arrived at 3 different newspapers: the San Francisco Examiner, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. Inside each was a handwritten message, filled with spelling errors, taunts, and a demand. The letters contained details of the murders at Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs. Information only the killer could know. But more disturbing still, each letter carried a third of a strange cryptogram, a puzzle he claimed held his identity. The writer gave instructions. Each paper must publish its section of the cipher on the front page. If not, he threatened, more would die. The letters were signed with a symbol, a circle with a cross running through it. It was the first time the world saw his mark. And soon, it would have a name. Days later, another letter arrived at the San Francisco Examiner. This one opened with a chilling declaration. "This is the Zodiac speaking." The killer had given himself an identity. He wasn't faceless anymore. He was Zodiac. The cipher he sent was a labyrinth of 408 characters, a jumble of symbols, letters, and shapes that seemed impossible to solve. The killer claimed the cipher would reveal his true identity, and until then, he warned he would continue his rampage. For days, newspapers printed the code. Readers across California pored over it, trying desperately to crack the puzzle. The police, too, tried everything, but the cipher held firm until a schoolteacher and his wife from Salinas sat down one weekend and began to piece it together. Donald and Betty Hardin were puzzle enthusiasts. Where others saw chaos, they saw patterns. Slowly, line by line, the solution began to emerge. When they finished, what they read was chilling beyond belief. The message began with these words: "I like killing people because it is so much fun." Zodiac compared killing to hunting wild animals. He said murder gave him the most thrilling experience, better than any thrill in life. He boasted that when he died, he would be reborn in paradise, and that his victims would become his slaves in the afterlife. But the final lines carried a cruel twist. The killer had promised to reveal his name in the cipher. Yet the message ended abruptly. "I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of slaves for my afterlife." The name never came. Instead, the cipher revealed the mind of a sadist, a hunter, and a man who reveled in his own power. The Vallejo Police Department now had proof. The same man was behind both double shootings. He was organized, calculating, and eager for attention. But they also knew something else. This killer wasn't going to stop. He had tasted power, and he was addicted to it. The press gave him the spotlight he craved, and each headline, each article, seemed only to fuel him more. Weeks later, another letter arrived. This time, the Zodiac directly addressed the police. He mocked them for failing to catch him. He bragged about how easy it was to kill without being seen. In his words, "When they do crack it, they will have me." Except, of course, they didn't, because Zodiac was always one step ahead, and he made it clear he would kill again. For the police, the letters were both a breakthrough and a curse. They proved his existence, gave him a name, and even revealed pieces of his psychology. But the more he wrote, the stronger his grip on the public's imagination became. With each message, Zodiac turned himself into a monster both real and mythical. A man who could kill anywhere, anytime, and laugh as the world tried in vain to unmask him. The ciphers turned into a public spectacle. Amateur codebreakers, hobbyists, and cryptography experts all tried their hand. For days, the Zodiac dominated headlines. Parents feared letting their children walk alone. Lovers' lanes sat empty. People double-locked their doors. The mystery of his words only amplified the terror of his crimes. And that was exactly what he wanted. Zodiac was no longer just a killer. He was an idea, an ever-present threat, a puzzle that could not be solved. The letters revealed more than just arrogance. They revealed pieces of Zodiac's mind. His crude spelling suggested a lack of formal education. His references to collecting slaves hinted at a distorted belief system, perhaps influenced by sci-fi or pulp novels. And yet, he was methodical enough to craft codes, to plan murders, and to manipulate the press. Who was this man? A genius? A lunatic? Or something far more ordinary, hidden in plain sight? The truth was maddeningly out of reach. But one thing was certain. He was watching, he was writing, and he was preparing to strike again. By the fall of 1969, the Zodiac Killer had claimed lives, captured headlines, and terrified a nation. With every cipher, he tightened his grip on California. With every taunt, he grew bolder. And soon, his crimes would escalate in ways that shocked even the most hardened detectives. The mask was slipping. The brutality was intensifying. And the legend of the Zodiac was just beginning to take shape. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in late September 1969. At Lake Berryessa, northeast of San Francisco, families enjoyed the water, couples picnicked, and the day passed peacefully. Among them were two college students, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. The young couple found a quiet spot on the shore, spread out a blanket, and relaxed in the golden autumn sun. But their peaceful outing was about to turn into a living nightmare. Around 6:30 p.m., Cecilia noticed a figure approaching from the distance. At first, it seemed like a fisherman, but as he drew closer, the sight was terrifying. The man wore a bizarre black hood, shaped almost like an executioner's mask. Over his chest, a white symbol, a circle with a cross through it. In his hands, a gun and a length of rope. The Zodiac Killer had come to Lake Berryessa. The man told them he was an escaped convict. He said he had murdered a guard and stolen a car. He needed their car to make his getaway to Mexico. Calm but firm, he ordered Cecilia to tie up Brian, then tied her himself. The couple complied, believing they might survive if they cooperated. But then, the man pulled out a knife. Without hesitation, he plunged it into Brian 6 times. Then he turned on Cecilia, stabbing her 10 times in the back as she lay helpless on the ground. The attack was frenzied, merciless. Blood stained the earth as the hooded figure calmly walked back to the road, leaving his victims to die. Before leaving, the Zodiac left behind his mark. On Brian's Volkswagen, he scrawled his symbol and a message in black marker. Vallejo, December 20th, 68, July 4th, 69, September 27 to 69, 6:30 by knife. It was a chilling record of his crimes, his own personal scorecard. Miraculously, Brian Hartnell survived the attack. Stabbed 6 times, he managed to cling to life and later gave police a harrowing account of the encounter. Cecilia, however, was not as fortunate. She died 2 days later in the hospital. For the first time, Zodiac had spoken directly to his victims. For the first time, he had shown himself in his bizarre costume, a vision of horror straight out of nightmare. And he had proven that his methods were evolving. He was no longer just a shooter. He was becoming more theatrical, more sadistic, and more dangerous. Just hours later, a call came in to the Napa County Sheriff's Office. The voice was calm, deliberate, almost bored. "I want to report a murder." "No, a double murder. They are 2 miles north of park headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carmangia. I'm the one that did it." Once again, Zodiac announced himself. He didn't run from the crime. He wanted credit. He wanted control. And once again, he slipped away into the night. Just 2 weeks later, Zodiac struck again. This time, the city itself would become his stage. On the night of October 11th, 1969, cab driver Paul Stein picked up a fare in San Francisco. His destination, Presidio Heights, a wealthy residential neighborhood near the Presidio military base. At the corner of Washington and Cherry Streets, the ride came to an end. But instead of paying, the passenger pulled out a gun. A single shot to the head ended Paul Stein's life. The killer calmly climbed into the front seat, tore a piece of the driver's bloody shirt, and walked away. What Zodiac didn't know, or perhaps didn't care, was that 3 children watched from an upstairs window. They saw him leaning over the cab, wiping fingerprints before strolling casually down the street like any ordinary man. Within minutes, police arrived. They missed him by only moments. Witnesses described a heavy-set man with glasses, eerily similar to earlier accounts. For the first time, Zodiac had killed in broad daylight shadow in the heart of San Francisco. He was no longer a rural phantom. He was a city predator. Days later, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle. Inside was yet another taunt and a grisly trophy. A piece of Paul Stine's bloody shirt, cut directly from the crime scene. In his letter, Zodiac mocked the police. He bragged about walking past patrol cars that night. He threatened to shoot children as they got off school buses. It was pure psychological warfare, and it worked. Parents in San Francisco lived in terror. Policemen doubled patrols, and Zodiac grew more powerful with every word. The Presidio Heights murder revealed a painful truth. The police had been close, frighteningly close, to catching him. In the chaos, a dispatcher mistakenly told officers to look for a black male suspect. When officers encountered a white man fitting the witnesses' descriptions, walking calmly away from the scene, they let him go. That man may very well have been the Zodiac Killer himself. It remains one of the most haunting missed opportunities in American criminal history. By the end of 1969, Zodiac had changed the rules of the game. He had proven he could kill anywhere. On rural roads, in public parks, or even in the streets of San Francisco. He had shown that he wasn't just a killer, but a showman, Dr. For the Zodiac, killing wasn't just about death. It was about control. It was about terror. And it was about the game. The Lake Berryessa attack. The Presidio Heights murder. The letters and the threats. By now, Zodiac wasn't just haunting California. He was haunting America. And as the 1970s began, his reign of fear was far from over. Next, he would unleash a new wave of letters, new threats, and new mysteries that remain unsolved to this very day. Days after Paul Stine's murder, the San Francisco Chronicle opened an envelope that made detectives shudder. Inside was a letter, and a scrap of bloody cloth cut from the murdered cab driver's shirt. It was proof that the Zodiac was not a hoax. Proof that he had been at the scene. Proof that he could kill at will and vanish into the night. The letter mocked police. The killer bragged about walking right past officers as they searched the area. He gloated that they would never catch him. And then, he made a threat that chilled every parent in California. In his letter, Zodiac wrote that he would begin targeting school children. He described in horrifying detail how he would shoot the tires of a school bus, then pick off the children as they fled. He even included a hand-drawn diagram of a homemade bomb, complete with wires, switches, and explosives. He called it his bus bomb. Parents were terrified. Police officers escorted buses. School children learned to duck beneath their seats at the sight of suspicious cars. For weeks, the entire Bay Area lived in fear of a nightmare scenario, a mass slaughter of children at the hands of a faceless predator. Zodiac understood the power of the press. He fed on the headlines, the front-page stories, the nightly news. Each new letter brought him more attention, and each new headline gave him what he wanted most: fear. The newspapers faced a dilemma. Should they print his threats and risk spreading terror? Or suppress them and risk pushing Zodiac to kill more? Time and again, they chose to print, because they had no choice. The killer had forced his way into the public conversation, and there was no ignoring him. As Zodiac's fame grew, so too did the chaos. The police began receiving dozens of calls from people claiming to be the Zodiac. Some were hoaxes, others rambling lunatics, still others cruel pranks. Detectives were forced to chase every lead, stretching resources thin, and the real Zodiac reveled in it. Each false call only deepened the sense that he was everywhere and nowhere. In his letters, Zodiac often bragged about the number of people he had killed. Sometimes he claimed 7, other times dozens. In one letter, he even suggested that his real tally was more than 30 victims. The police could only confirm 5 murders and 2 survivors. But what if he was telling the truth? What if there were other bodies out there, undiscovered, forgotten, claimed by the shadow of the Zodiac? That uncertainty only amplified the terror, because in the end, the truth lay only in Zodiac's words, and Zodiac's words were designed to torment. Zodiac's letters weren't just confessions. They were weapons. He wrote in misspelled words, mocking tones, crude jokes, and threats that blended fact with fantasy. He taunted the police for being too slow, too stupid, too weak to catch him. He bragged that killing gave him power, that he was collecting slaves for the afterlife. He even included crosshairs and tally marks, as if human lives were nothing more than points in a game. The Zodiac Killer wasn't just trying to frighten the public. He was trying to humiliate the people sworn to protect him. And every time his letters hit the front page, he succeeded. In October 1970, the San Francisco Chronicle received something strange in the mail, a Halloween greeting card. The front showed a grinning skeleton. Inside, Zodiac had scrawled a mocking message. "I feel in my bones you ache to know my name, and so I'll clue you in, boo." Attached to the card was yet another tally of his supposed victims, signed once more with his infamous crosshair symbol. To the police, it was another cruel reminder. Zodiac was still out there, still watching, still laughing. Along with his letters, Zodiac continued to send ciphers. Some were cracked, others defied solution for decades. The most famous was the so-called 340 cipher, mailed after Paul Stein's murder. For over 50 years, no one could solve it. It wasn't until 2020 that a team of amateur code breakers finally broke its secrets. The solution, like much of Zodiac's writing, was a taunt. I hope you're having lots of fun and try and catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner because I now have enough slaves to work for me. Again, no name, no identity. Only more terror, more mystery, more control. By now, the Zodiac Killer had turned the Bay Area into a city under siege. Parents were afraid to let their children ride the bus. Couples avoided lovers' lanes. Strangers eyed one another with suspicion. And the police, though working tirelessly, were always one step behind. The killer had turned a region into a chessboard. Every move he made was calculated to instill maximum fear. And the public had no choice but to play his game. By the early 1970s, the Zodiac Killer was more than a murderer. He was a symbol of fear, a man who turned letters into weapons, a phantom who could strike anywhere, anytime, and laugh while the world trembled. The taunts, the ciphers, the threats, they made him a legend. But they also made him a ghost, one the police could never quite pin down. And as the Zodiac's letters grew stranger and his boasts grew louder, one question haunted everyone. Was he still killing? Or had he disappeared into the night, leaving only words behind? The mystery would deepen, the theories would multiply, and the name Zodiac would echo for decades. By the early 1970s, police had boxes full of Zodiac letters, dozens of witness statements, and multiple crime scenes. But what they didn't have was a face they could prove belonged to the killer. Still, one name rose above all others. A man whose life, habits, and sinister secrets seemed to align with the shadow of the Zodiac. His name was Arthur Lee Allen. Arthur Lee Allen was a former schoolteacher, dishonorably discharged for inappropriate behavior around children. He was intelligent, troubled, and had a dark reputation among those who knew him. In 1971, investigators received a tip that pointed directly to Allen. A friend of his told police that Allen had once talked about wanting to kill couples at lovers' lanes. Even more chilling, he said Allen had spoken about calling himself Zodiac. The evidence around Arthur Lee Allen piled up like ominous puzzle pieces. He lived near Vallejo, close to the first murders. He owned a Zodiac brand wristwatch, complete with the same crosshair symbol the killer used as a signature. He was ambidextrous, a detail that matched handwriting inconsistencies in the Zodiac's letters. On the day of the Lake Berryessa attack, Allen's friends reported he returned home with bloody knives in his car. He claimed he had been killing chickens. He even admitted to telling friends about his desire to hunt humans for sport. All of it seemed damning. But when it came to hard evidence, things grew murkier. Despite the circumstantial evidence, investigators faced a problem. Nothing definitively tied Allen to the Zodiac crimes. Handwriting experts compared Allen's writing to Zodiac's letters. The results? No match. Fingerprints recovered from Zodiac letters and crime scenes. They didn't match Allen. Years later, DNA tests on saliva from Zodiac stamps also ruled Allen out. Every time investigators came close, the case slipped away like smoke through their fingers. And so, Arthur Lee Allen remained the most likely suspect, and yet, officially, never charged. Allen wasn't the only man investigated. Over the decades, hundreds of names crossed investigators' desks. Some stood out more than others. Rick Marshall, a San Francisco movie projectionist, was suspected due to his love of cryptography and his reclusive lifestyle. He matched parts of the police sketch, and his typewriter was rumored to resemble the one used in some Zodiac communications. But once again, handwriting samples didn't match, and the evidence was too thin. Richard Gaikowski, a radical journalist, also drew suspicion. He had ties to San Francisco's counterculture scene, and some thought his writings resembled Zodiac's cryptic style. A former co-worker even swore that Gaikowski was the killer. But Gaikowski was never formally charged, and no physical evidence ever placed him at the crime scenes. Lawrence Kane, a man with a history of stalking women and brushes with the law, became another suspect. He bore a striking resemblance to the Zodiac sketch. A survivor of the Lake Tahoe abduction case claimed Kane looked like the man who attacked her. His name even appeared in some amateur cipher solutions. But once again, the evidence never held. Kane, like so many others, was suspected, but never proven. In more recent years, a man named Earl Van Best Jr. was accused by his biological son in a controversial book titled The Most Dangerous Animal of All. The author claimed that his father's handwriting matched Zodiac's, that his name appeared hidden within the ciphers, and that he resembled the sketch. The book captured headlines, but experts dismissed much of the evidence as circumstantial or fabricated. Still, it added yet another name to the endless list of suspects. With so many suspects, the case turned into fertile ground for speculation. Some believe Zodiac was a loner, a man living quietly in Northern California, hiding in plain sight. Others argued he might have been a police officer or military man, given his apparent knowledge of codes, weapons, and investigation procedures. A few even suggested Zodiac was more than one person, that the letters came from copycats, or that the crimes were committed by multiple killers working together. Without conclusive evidence, the theories grew wild. And the longer the case went unsolved, the more people projected their fears, suspicions, and obsessions onto the phantom known as Zodiac. The tragedy of the Zodiac investigation is this. Despite dozens of suspects, endless tips, and countless man-hours, no one was ever convicted. The killer left behind letters, ciphers, threats, and bodies. But he left almost nothing investigators could use in court. No reliable fingerprints. No confirmed DNA. No weapon. Every suspect fell apart under scrutiny. Handwriting could be faked. Ciphers could be coincidences. Witness descriptions varied. And the Zodiac himself seemed to delight in this. He had created a crime that was more puzzle than proof. A puzzle that still haunts investigators today. Arthur Lee Allen, Rick Marshall, Richard Gaikowski, Lawrence Kane, Earl Van Best Jr., and dozens more. Each man fit part of the profile. Each man seemed, in some way, to be the Zodiac, and yet, none could ever be proven. Perhaps Zodiac was among them. Perhaps he was none of them. What is certain is this. The true identity of the Zodiac remains locked in the shadows, as elusive as the man himself. And as the decades rolled on, new tools, new technology, and new investigators would all try to crack the mystery. But would the truth finally emerge? Or was the Zodiac destined to remain unsolved forever? By the 1980s, the Zodiac Killer had faded from headlines. The murders had stopped. The letters slowed, then ceased altogether. Some believed he was dead. Others thought he had simply moved on, changing his hunting ground. But the mystery of Zodiac refused to die. Detectives, journalists, and amateur sleuths kept the case alive. And as technology advanced, so too did the hope that one day, the killer's true identity might finally be revealed. The 1990s brought a new weapon to the fight against Zodiac: DNA analysis. Investigators carefully tested the envelopes and stamps the killer had licked. Tiny fragments of saliva were extracted, analyzed, and stored. For the first time, police had a genetic profile of the Zodiac Killer. But the problem was clear. DNA science was still in its infancy. The samples were degraded, partial, and not strong enough to confirm identity with certainty. And so, the DNA evidence lingered like a whisper, tantalizing but incomplete. As the internet grew, so did the Zodiac community. Thousands of amateur detectives gathered online, dissecting every letter, every cipher, every rumor. Websites dedicated entirely to the case sprang up, filled with scanned documents, crime scene photos, and endless theories. For some, the Zodiac became an obsession. Hours turned into years of research. Suspects were named and debated in heated forums. Entire lives were consumed by the search for the truth. It was a digital manhunt unlike anything seen before, and it continues to this day. In the early 2000s, law enforcement once again turned its attention to the Zodiac. Cold case units re-examined old evidence. New DNA technology was applied. Handwriting experts revisited the letters. Forensic analysts studied fingerprints and palm prints found on the envelopes. And yet, the case remained stubborn. Every new analysis ended the same way, inconclusive. The Zodiac was still a ghost. Then, in December 2020, a breakthrough shocked the world. For over 50 years, the infamous 340 cipher had gone unsolved. Dozens of cryptographers, law enforcement agencies, and hobbyists had tried and failed. But a team of 3 amateur codebreakers from the US, Australia, and Belgium finally cracked it. Using custom software, pattern recognition, and persistence, they unlocked the message. It read, in part, "I hope you're having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber, because I now have enough slaves to work for me." The message confirmed what investigators already knew. Zodiac reveled in cruelty, in arrogance, in mocking the police. But once again, there was no name, no identity, just more shadows. In October 2021, a group of more than 40 independent investigators, former police, journalists, and military intelligence officers, called themselves the Case Breakers. They announced that they had solved the mystery. Their suspect? A man named Gary Francis Post. Post was an Air Force veteran, a house painter, and by all accounts, a troubled man with a violent past. He died in 2018. The Case Breakers claimed that scars on Post's forehead matched witness descriptions of the Zodiac. They pointed to alleged links between Post and the Riverside murder of Sherry Jo Bates in 1966, a crime some have long suspected was an early Zodiac killing. They even said that hidden messages in the Zodiac's ciphers revealed Post's name. The announcement made headlines worldwide. Had the mystery finally been solved? Law enforcement wasn't convinced. The FBI quickly issued a statement. The Zodiac case remains open. They did not confirm Post as a suspect. Critics argued that the Case Breakers had relied on circumstantial evidence and speculation. No DNA connected Post to the crimes. No fingir prints, no odwórczych matches, no definitive proof. To some, the claim was sensationalism. To others, it was the closest answer yet. But as of today, the Zodiac's name remains officially unknown. Half a century later, the Zodiac Killer remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. Why? Because unlike other serial killers, Zodiac left us more than bodies. He left us puzzles, taunts, and an unfinished game. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted to outlive his crimes. And in that sense, he succeeded. Because even now, decades after his last confirmed murder, we are still speaking his name. DNA may one day solve the Zodiac mystery. A hidden clue may emerge from his letters. Or perhaps a confession lies waiting in the files of the dead. Until then, the case endures. Each new generation discovers the ciphers, the letters, the fear, and the legend. Because the Zodiac wasn't just a killer. He was an architect of terror, a man who turned murder into myth. And that myth still haunts us 50 years later. It has been more than 50 years since the Zodiac Killer's first confirmed murders. 5 known dead. 2 survivors. Dozens more claimed in letters that may or may not be true. Countless suspects. Endless theories. Thousands of hours spent chasing a ghost. And yet, the case remains unsolved. The name behind the mask remains hidden. The face behind the glasses remains unknown. The Zodiac has become more than a killer. He has become a legend. The fear Zodiac created was unlike anything California had seen before. Parents held their children closer. Couples abandoned lovers' lanes. Strangers watched one another with suspicion. For years, the Bay Area lived under the shadow of a man who could strike anywhere at any time. And that fear didn't fade when the killing stopped. It lingered. It grew, because the killer had never been caught. Zodiac's legacy inspired imitators. Over the years, police received letters from copycats claiming to be the killer. Some mimicked his handwriting. Others sent crude ciphers. None of them proved to be the real Zodiac. But each letter reminded the public that the name alone carried power. Even decades later, the mere mention of Zodiac was enough to reignite fear. Hollywood took notice. In 1971, Clint Eastwood starred in Dirty Harry, a film loosely inspired by the Zodiac case. The villain, a deranged sniper called Scorpio, bore unmistakable resemblance to the real killer. Decades later, David Fincher's film Zodiac brought the case back into the spotlight, meticulously recreating the investigation and reigniting global fascination. Books, podcasts, documentaries, and endless online forums followed. The Zodiac became part of American mythology, a figure as infamous as Jack the Ripper, a killer who was never caught, and thus never forgotten. Why does the Zodiac still haunt us? Because he represents the ultimate unsolved riddle. Most killers are eventually unmasked. Their names are known. Their faces are remembered. Their reigns come to an end. But Zodiac denied us closure. He left puzzles instead of answers. He left letters instead of a trial. He left symbols instead of a face. And human beings fear the unknown more than anything else. In the end, that may have been Zodiac's greatest crime. Not the murders, but the control. He controlled the headlines. He controlled the police. He controlled the fears of millions. And he controls us still, even now, as we retell his story. Because every time we wonder who he was, every time we look at a suspect's photo, every time we study a cipher, Zodiac wins again. His shadow lingers. His game continues. His name endures. Perhaps one day, DNA will unmask him. Perhaps a hidden confession will surface. Perhaps the truth has been in front of us all along, waiting to be seen. Or perhaps the Zodiac will remain a phantom forever. A name without a face. A crime without an ending. A reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved. Until then, the circle with the cross remains, a symbol of fear. And the words that first introduced him still echo across time.